On a warm April night in 2012, the University of Florida buzzed with music, laughter, and alcohol. Michael Torres, a 20-year-old economics student, joined a fraternity party he rarely attended. By 1:30 in the morning, cameras captured him leaving alone. He looked unsteady, his walk slow, his shirt loose around his shoulders. That was the last confirmed image of him alive. By sunrise, friends realized he never made it back to his dorm. His bed was untouched, his car sat in the same spot, and his phone, wallet, and ID were nowhere to be found. Michael had vanished in the middle of campus, only minutes from safety. Rumors ignited within hours. Some pointed at the fraternity president, saying he covered up a drunken accident. Others whispered about a classmate who clashed with Michael over a scholarship. A bartender who once argued with him about a bar tab became a target too. Each rumor built pressure. Headlines screamed of secrets, betrayal, and campus conspiracies. Families and students turned on one another. Theories multiplied, but no evidence tied any of them to the disappearance. The case froze, leaving only speculation. For more than 10 years, Michael's family lit candles, begged for answers, and faced silence. Then, a construction project on an abandoned lot broke the ground open. Beneath the dirt, investigators uncovered bones, a watch, and fragments of clothing. The truth was darker and simpler than anyone imagined. Michael had not been taken by a jealous rival or hidden by a secret society. He had crossed paths with a criminal nobody suspected, a thief looking for easy money, who turned violent when Michael fought back. The discovery of his remains would finally reveal how a walk home turned into a fatal encounter, and why justice took a decade to arrive. If you want to know who Michael Torres really was, how the investigation unfolded, and why it took more than a decade to uncover the truth, stay with us. In the next part, we'll go back to the beginning, Michael's life, his campus world, and the first. Outside the classroom, Michael lived much like an ordinary college student, but with boundaries. He loved basketball, played recreationally with friends, and followed professional sports closely. But he wasn't the type who spent weekends at clubs or late nights at bars. Most people who knew him said he kept a balanced life, focused on studies, close to family, but still willing to join social events when invited. Friends described Michael as approachable but disciplined. He wasn't withdrawn, but he wasn't reckless either. He liked to talk, he liked to laugh, but he never lost sight of his goals. His approach to life was steady. Wake up early, make it to class, stay on top of assignments, and spend nights reviewing notes. He wasn't the student you expected to vanish into rumors or scandal. Still, Michael was competitive. He had a reputation in the economics program as someone who fought hard for academic recognition. That reputation brought friction. In particular, there were whispers about his rivalry with another student over scholarship opportunities. Professors sometimes noticed tension in the classroom. To some, this competitiveness was a sign of drive. To others, it created enemies. By early 2012, Michael had also joined a fraternity. He wasn't one of its most visible or outspoken members, but he showed up. He attended events, contributed when asked, and tried to build connections. For Michael, fraternity life was less about drinking and more about networking. He knew that, in certain circles, being part of a fraternity could open doors after graduation. That spring semester, the fraternity house was hosting one of its largest parties. Dozens of students, music blasting, alcohol flowing. For Michael, it was one of the few nights he stepped away from his normal, structured habits. His friends later said he seemed relaxed, maybe even tipsy, but not out of control. For those who knew his usual style, it was unusual to see him at a loud party drinking into the early hours. But on the night of April 14th, Michael was there, and that made his disappearance even more shocking. Michael's character didn't suggest risk-taking. He wasn't known for drugs, gambling, or dangerous behavior. His record was clean. He had no criminal history, no police reports, no debts. When word spread that Michael hadn't come back to his dorm that night, his professors were stunned. His classmates were uneasy. His family was devastated. They couldn't understand how someone who rarely missed class, who never ignored a call, could suddenly fall off the grid. At first, some thought maybe Michael had decided to take a break. Stress, exams, social pressure. Students sometimes disappeared for a day or two. But by the next morning, when his bed was still untouched, when he didn't answer messages, when no one saw him in class, the alarm became real. This wasn't a break. This was a disappearance. For investigators, the background of Michael Torres became an early clue. They asked, who would want to harm him? What secrets could exist in the life of a student who seemed so ordinary? On paper, Michael's life didn't fit the profile of someone who would end up missing. And yet here it was. A missing persons report filed before noon, a search underway before the end of the day, and a community already fearing the worst. In the first press conferences, officers emphasized that Michael's background showed no signs of risk behavior. That statement, meant to reassure the public, only added to the confusion. If this wasn't a troubled student, then what had happened to him? This simple fact, Michael's clean background, his reputation as a disciplined student, made his disappearance stand out. It wasn't just another missing student case. It was the sudden vanishing of someone who seemed to have no reason to run, no history of trouble, and no enemies strong enough to explain it. That contradiction fueled the mystery. Everyone who knew Michael struggled with the same question. How could a student with everything to lose and everything going for him simply walk out of a fraternity house and never be seen alive again? His story became one of the most puzzling cases in the history of the University of Florida. A young man from a hard-working family, a promising student with a bright future, was suddenly gone. And the search for answers would consume his family, his campus, and investigators for over a decade. It is late April 2012 at the University of Florida. The fraternity house is emptying out. At 1:30 a.m., a doorway camera. From the house to Michael's dorm is a short walk, 7 to 10 minutes if you stay on the main path. The route passes 2 city cameras and a private camera bolted above a late-night sandwich shop. It also skirts a neglected parcel of land students use as a shortcut when they want to shave a minute off the walk. One of the street lights near that shortcut has been out for weeks, leaving a soft pool of darkness along the fence line. A faded construction sign leans by the corner, and the temporary fence is bent where foot traffic has pushed it aside. Investigators later mapped the steps he should have taken. Down the sidewalk, past the shop, across the signalized corner, then along the dorm green. But the system never captures his face again. Between 1:33 and 1:36 a.m., the sandwich shop's lens, blocked by an awning and a stack of delivery crates, misses the sidewalk entirely. At 1:37 a.m., a traffic camera at the next intersection snags a blurry silhouette of a young man with Michael's build, but the frame is too soft to confirm identity. From 1:42 a.m. to 1:50 a.m., every angle goes dark along the fence of the vacant lot. No camera covers that run of pavement. The dorm lobby camera never records Michael coming home. Digital traces tell their own narrow story. Michael leaves the party with his phone and wallet. After 1:31 a.m., his phone sends no calls and no texts. At 1:34 a.m., it pings a tower near the main intersection that borders the vacant lot. Then the trail stops. No more pings. No background app chatter. Either the device was powered down, destroyed, or its battery removed. His bank card stays silent from 9:10 p.m. when he made a purchase at the party through the next morning. Social accounts show nothing after 11:50 p.m. the night before. A few people were awake in those minutes, and their memories build a thin frame. At 1:50 a.m., a student cutting back from the library hears raised voices near the vacant lot. She can't pick out words. She sees no faces. It is quick, then quiet again. At 1:56 a.m., a dorm security guard notes in his log that the side path is unusually empty, and the area calm. An observation that in hindsight feels cruelly neutral. Around 2 a.m., two students walking from a convenience store think they see someone who looks like Michael in the distance. The street is dim. They cannot say for sure which way he turned. None of the blue light emergency phones along the route register an activation. Morning exposes the gap. At 7 a.m., a professor marks Michael absent and notes it as out of character. By 8:30 a.m., Michael's roommate notices the untouched bed, the next day's clothes still on the hanger, and no sign he came in at all. At 9 a.m., residents' life logs a welfare concern and tries calling. The phone goes straight to voicemail. At 11:30 a.m., the university reaches his parents. At noon, Gainesville police take the missing person report. Officers walk the path that afternoon. They start at the fraternity door and pace the sidewalks toward the dorms. There is no dropped wallet, no phone, no scuff on the concrete anyone can point to. They pull video from the storefronts and traffic poles and confirm what the campus police already fear. Property checks add pressure to a growing theory. Michael clearly left the party with his phone and wallet. Neither is found in the first sweeps, not in the brush by the fence, not in the gutters, not in the bins behind the sandwich shop. His stainless steel watch never surfaces in pawn shop scans or online marketplaces during the first canvas period. His bank cards are never used again. Taken together, these facts point toward theft as a motive, or at least a theft that followed violence. Environmental notes fill in the rest. The weather is dry and cool. Visibility should be decent, except for the broken streetlight along the fence line. It is a weekend night. After 1:30 a.m., foot traffic thins to a trickle. The vacant lot opens onto a side path through a gap in the bent fence. From the sidewalk, the ground inside falls away into knee-high grass. The path to the dorm runs within 60 to 90 meters of that opening. Those are the bones of the night. From them, investigators draft the questions that will steer the search. If Michael took the main path, why does he never appear on the dorm camera? If he took the shortcut and cut close to the fence, did someone step out from the gap and corner him where no lens would see? Why did the phone stop at the exact corner where the light is out? Was it snatched and shut off, smashed, or disassembled? If there was a confrontation, why is there no obvious spill of items on the public side of the fence? Did any noise carry beyond the weeds? Or did the quick burst heard at 1:50 a.m. mark the end of a struggle inside the lot? Detectives returned to the fraternity, the dorm, and the shops to confirm timing. They sync camera clocks against a reference time and find minor drifts, then correct them. The 1:30-12 a.m. exit remains firm. The blurry figure at the intersection is time-stamped 1:38:44 a.m. after correction. They test the walk at a sober pace and at a slow post-party pace to model when Michael should have been at each point. In both models, the corner by the lot sits within the same critical window as the phone's last ping. They re-interview the student who heard voices at 1:50 a.m. She recalls two tones, one higher. Traffic patrol files are checked for any disturbances called in between 1:30 and 2 a.m. There are none. Hospitals are checked for unidentified admissions overnight. Nothing matches. The main roads in and out of campus show no automatic plate reader hits tied to Michael's car, and his car sits parked where he left it. By evening, the working theory narrows. The simplest explanation for a student who leaves a party, vanishes in minutes and leaves no digital trail is a rapid face-to-face encounter in the blind spot by the lot. The lack of a dropped phone or wallet on the sidewalk suggests a confrontation off the pavement or a swift move across the fence line. The dead streetlight, the gap in the fence, the last ping at the corner, and the canine loss at the weeds all point to the same patch of ground. This is where the case turns from a missing person checklist into a full-scale search for a crime scene that may be only meters wide. Detectives request additional private footage from homes and businesses bordering the dark stretch. They distribute flyers asking for anyone who walked past the lot between 1:30 and 2 a.m. to come forward, even if they heard only a sound or saw only a shadow. They flag the student who heard voices for a formal statement to lock the outer edge of the window. And while policy keeps the lens on people close to Michael, the evidence on the map tilts heavily toward a different path, an opportunistic attack by someone he did not know, staged in the few minutes when the campus went quiet and the cameras looked away. On the afternoon of April 15, 2012, just hours after Michael Torres failed to return to his dorm, Gainesville police officially opened a missing persons case. His roommate had sounded the alarm that morning, and by midday, officers were already on campus. The urgency was clear. Michael was young, reliable, and not the type to simply vanish. Investigators quickly narrowed the window of disappearance to a critical half-hour between 1:30 and 2 a.m. That half-hour would become the center of everything that followed. The first step was obvious: search the fraternity house where Michael had last been seen. Officers combed through every hallway, every room, every corner. That exit was caught on camera. The fraternity house had a security system monitoring its entrance. At exactly 1:30 a.m., Michael appeared on the screen. He stepped outside, wearing jeans and a light-colored polo shirt, moving unsteadily but still under his own control. He carried nothing visible, and no one followed behind him. That was the last confirmed image of him alive. Police traced the natural route back toward his dorm, only a 10-minute walk away. Along that path were 2 city-owned cameras and 1 private security camera. None of them showed Michael. The 2 city cameras caught other students walking home around the same time, but Michael never appeared. The private camera, mounted outside a late-night restaurant, had stopped recording earlier that evening due to a malfunction. That missing footage created a blind spot at the worst possible stretch of road. By sunrise on the 15th, search dogs were brought in. The K-9 unit began at the fraternity house entrance, using clothing from Michael's dorm room to track his scent. The dogs followed it down the sidewalk, across a dimly lit block and toward a public parking lot near the main road. Then, suddenly, the trail stopped cold. Handlers tried again, circling the area, but the scent was gone. The implication was chilling. Either Michael had entered a vehicle, or he had been forced into one. Both possibilities suggested he had not continued walking on foot. Police marked the location carefully. That parking lot became one of the first real clues. Despite the dogs and the cameras, no one had actually seen what happened. Investigators canvassed the area, knocking on doors, interviewing students who had walked home after the party. Some said they thought they noticed a figure resembling Michael heading in the direction of the dorms around 2 a.m., but none were certain. Their accounts lacked details. Was it really him, or just another student of similar build? No one heard shouting. No one reported a struggle. No one found a phone or a wallet discarded on the ground. For a disappearance that seemed so sudden, the silence of the night was unbearable. Attention quickly turned to Michael's belongings. His wallet and phone were gone, missing along with him. Without solid evidence of an outside attacker, investigators turned inward. They asked themselves the question law enforcement often asks. If not a stranger, then who? When violent crime strikes on a college campus, statistics point first toward people the victim already knew. That reasoning drove detectives to look at Michael's immediate circle, and soon, 3 names began to surface. The first was Ryan Mitchell, president of the fraternity that had hosted the party. Ryan was older, a senior, and he carried significant influence on campus. Rumors swirled that he had reason to hide what happened inside the house. Some whispered that a fight broke out and Ryan suppressed it to protect the fraternity's reputation. Others claimed he seemed nervous in the days after Michael vanished. None of it was backed by evidence, but in the absence of answers, suspicion spread quickly. The second was Ethan Walker, a classmate and academic rival. Ethan and Michael had both been competing for the same scholarship in economics. Their rivalry was well known. They had clashed in class debates, sometimes so heated that other students recalled the tension. Investigators couldn't ignore that potential motive, jealousy or resentment. To many, Ethan fit the profile of someone who might want to remove competition. Again, there was no direct link to Michael's disappearance, but the theory lingered. The third was Jackie Nguyen, a bartender at a popular spot near campus. Jackie had once argued with Michael over an unpaid tab. It was a small dispute, but gossip transformed it into something darker. Some claimed Michael owed him money. Others believed Jackie had friends willing to send a message. By the time police questioned him, Jackie was already under a cloud of suspicion, not because of evidence, but because students kept repeating the story. Each of the 3 men was interviewed extensively. All denied involvement. None could provide airtight alibis. Ryan said he went home after the party, but no one could confirm. Ethan said he spent the night studying, alone in his dorm. Jackie said he worked his shift and went home afterward. Investigators noted the gaps in their stories, but found no fit. The fraternity president, the academic rival, and the bartender became, in the eyes of the public, the only explanations for what had happened. Yet the real explanation remained hidden. Police didn't know it yet, but by focusing too tightly on people Michael knew, they were about to lose precious years chasing shadows, while the truth lay just beyond their reach. The investigation turns inward because there is nothing concrete pointing to a stranger. No weapon, no body, no clean camera trail beyond the fraternity door at 1:30 a.m. Detectives apply a simple filter: access, motive, gaps in time, and anything that looks like an alibi. 3 names keep coming back in interviews and rumors: Ryan Mitchell, Ethan Walker, and Jackie Nguyen. None of them is seen on camera with Michael that night. None of them has a perfect alibi. That is enough to keep them in the room. Ryan Mitchell is the fraternity president and the face of the party. He is 22, a senior in business, the kind of student who knows every rule and every loophole. He supervised the event, moved between rooms, checked on the music, watched alcohol levels, and made sure security kept the door under control. He knows that a public scandal can shut down a chapter. He also knows cameras watch the lobby and the front entrance. Witnesses place Ryan all over the house from midnight to 1:20. He says that at 1:25 he told security to lower the volume and start winding down. At 1:30 the lobby camera records Michael stepping into the night, alone. Ryan is not in the frame. From 1:40 to 2:15, Ryan claims he stayed to clean up with 2 members. Both back him, but their minute-by-minute accounts do not match. One says Ryan was in the kitchen at 1:45. The other remembers him at the back stairwell around the same time. There is no digital trail to fix him in place. His phone shows little activity after 1:20. Internal group chats also go quiet. Detectives ask the obvious questions. Did a fight happen inside? Did someone get hurt and was it covered up? A full sweep of the house turns up nothing that supports that story. No broken furniture, no blood traces, no carpet clip. Ethan Walker is a different kind of suspect. He is 20, a sophomore in economics, and Michael's academic rival. Professors know them as the 2 strongest students in the cohort. They are both in the running for a research scholarship. They argue in class. They send sharp emails about data sources and citations. Screenshots of those emails circulate, edited and stripped of context, feeding a story that Ethan hated Michael. In reality, no one can point to a real-world threat or a physical confrontation. Ethan says he did not attend the party. He says he stayed in his dorm and worked. The digital record is messy. He logs into the university's online library at 12:50 a.m. There is activity again around 1:10, then a gap until just after 2. Cell tower data places his phone near the dorm complex, not far from the path Michael should have taken home, but the ping radius is wide. No roommate confirms seeing him at the desk during the half-hour window. Detectives search his room. They collect his laptop. Forensics find no violence, no blood, no searches about harming someone that night. There is no trace of Michael in Ethan's space. Motive is the thin thread. Could anger over a scholarship push a student to murder? Maybe. But there is nothing to show a plan or a trigger that night. Still, once forums and student groups latch on, the pressure is relentless. People avoid him in hallways. Group projects push him out quietly. He is not charged, but he is marked. In the case log, Ethan remains on the board because of the gap in his timeline, not because of evidence that ties him to a crime. Jackie Nguyen works the bar down the street. He is 24 and on the late shift that covers the window when Michael disappears. There was a small dispute weeks earlier when Michael's group left a tab unsettled, and Jackie had to chase it down. It was resolved, but once the rumor machine starts, the story grows. By the time detectives arrive, strangers online are already speculating that Jackie had someone scare Michael. Cameras inside the... At this point, detectives step back and compare. Who had access? Ryan is the closest to Michael's last verified moment, but the house offers no scene. Who has motive? Ethan has the cleanest narrative motive on paper, jealousy, but nothing else supports it. Who had opportunity on the route? Jackie is stationed near the path, but the cameras and coworkers hold him in place. All three have gaps. None has a weapon, a stain, or a stolen item that points back to Michael. The timeline keeps pulling everyone to the same narrow space, the 10-minute walk and the half-hour between 1:30 and 2 a.m. Canine units lost scent near the public lot by the main road. That suggests a vehicle. Yet the investigation remains fixed on people Michael knew, because that is how these cases often go. Detectives circle the suspects again, running the same questions with more pressure. Did you leave the house? Did you leave the dorm? Did you slip out the back of the bar? Each man denies it. Each story has soft edges, but none turns into a confession or a lead that breaks open the case. The media fills the void. Reporters repeat the names because they are the only names available. Headlines build a triangle of motive, reputation, rivalry, and revenge. Parents on campus demand quick answers. The department holds briefings, asks for tips, releases the 1:30 a.m. clip, and receives hundreds of calls that go nowhere. The more the cameras fail and the logs blur, the louder the room gets. Every new rumor drags the same three men back into the spotlight. Detectives try to widen the lens. They review rideshare data, cab dispatches, and bus routes. Nothing places Michael in a registered vehicle. They ask hospitals and clinics about overnight admissions with unexplained injuries. They check pawn shops for a watch or a student ID. They canvass private cameras on side streets only to learn that one crucial unit near a late-night restaurant stopped working earlier in the evening. The blind spot sits exactly where it can do the most harm. Weeks pass. The file gets thicker with interviews and thinner on hope. The pattern is stable. Lots of talk, no proof. And that becomes the tragic engine of the story. The more the city looks inward, the more time the real answer spends outside the frame. The case hardens around three familiar faces. The evidence does not. With no body and no weapon, the investigation leans on narrative and proximity. It is not enough. The names stick anyway. By the end of the first year, the file carries 3 thick sections, each with interviews, maps, phone pings, work logs, and contradictions too small to hold up in court. The district attorney declines to charge. Detectives keep the case open and revisit the suspects on anniversaries and when new tips arrive. Nothing breaks. The campus moves on and never really does. The 3 men try to rebuild and never really can. All of it turns on a broken camera, a dark stretch of road, and 30 minutes that refuse to speak. The city believes the killer sits within the circle. The investigation can't prove it. And as the noise grows, the real trail cools, inch by inch, into a cold case. Headlines hit in the first week. A student vanished after a fraternity party. The 1:30 a.m. clip from the lobby camera ran on TV and across social feeds. Viewers watched Michael step into the night. They waited for the next frame that never came. The tip line lit up. Hundreds of calls. Most were guesses or recycled rumors. Police held 2 briefings and confirmed the same hard fact. The window between 1:30 and 2 a.m. was empty. That half hour was the hole in the case. Reporters pushed for names. Detectives refused to name suspects without charges. Pressure climbed anyway. Weeks 2 through 4 turned noisy. Talk shows booked retired detectives and campus safety experts. Motives got stacked like headlines. Protect the fraternity's image. win a scholarship at any cost, settle a bar debt that never should have mattered. The same three names echoed on every channel and forum: Ryan, Ethan, Jackie, even though none of them had been arrested. A crowdsourced map of the walk to the dorm spread online. People went out at night to retrace the steps and photograph dark corners. Student forums opened threads titled, "Then the storm hit the three men most often named." Ryan was branded a cover-up artist. Employers backed away from interviews. Ethan was pushed to the edges in class. Screenshots of edited emails made him look violent when he wasn't. Jackie's immigrant story was splashed on tabloid sites next to the word debt. He lost his job for a while because customers complained. Lawyers for all three sent letters urging outlets to stop naming them without charges. It didn't slow the cycle. Inside the case file, the note stayed the same for each. No direct physical evidence tying them to the disappearance. Investigators widened the search. Forensics teams drained culverts, combed parks, and checked parking lots for drag marks or blood. They found none. Additional canine tracks started at the fraternity entrance and died again at the public lot by the main road. The pattern repeated. Detectives pulled hard drives from nearby businesses. One street camera along the route was dead that night. It sat exactly where the path went dark. Digital work stalled too. Michael's phone shut down minutes after 1:30. There was no cloud backup that held new clues. Working theory shifted. An opportunistic vehicle could have approached the darkest block. The idea of a stranger gained weight. But without a license plate, it was a theory, not a lead. Under pressure, the case looped back to the inner circle. Months in, detectives re-interviewed the same friends and classmates. They imaged laptops and phones again. They lined up the same timelines and asked the same questions. Nothing clicked. Each round consumed time the case could not spare. Any trace a stranger left on the route was fading, washed away by traffic and weather. The golden hours had passed. The investigation was now trying to recover what time had already taken. The family pushed forward while wearing down. Michael's parents went on local TV, promised a reward, and begged for credible tips. The campus held a candlelight vigil every month the first year. Attendance dropped as semesters changed. Volunteers built a Find Michael Torres page and filtered anonymous messages. Some tips were sincere and wrong. Some were cruel jokes. The family repeated the same line: "If you know something, say it." The silence that followed felt heavier with each plea. False breakthroughs spiked and fell. A dark sedan reported near the lot turned out to belong to a resident who worked overnight shifts. A knife found by a shallow stream tested clean for Michael's DNA. An anonymous email claimed responsibility in dramatic language. The IP traced back to a teenager looking for attention. Each crest of hope ended with another not connected. The public grew skeptical. The detective. At the 1-year mark, the task force shrank. A lead investigator took a transfer. The file moved to the cold case unit with a clear condition: reopen only with new physical evidence, a DNA hit, or a credible witness. The family kept paying to renew posters and continued the reward. The school community cared, but not with the same urgency. New classes arrived. Old ones left. The case stayed. The frozen years set in. From 2013 to 2015, detectives compared new arrestees statewide for a pattern of late-night robberies near campuses. Nothing matched the timeline or the location. From 2016 to 2018, The city began upgrading its camera network with better coverage and retention. It was too late for a night in 2012. From 2019 to 2021, analysts used new data tools to rescore old tips and cross-link names to arrests and vehicles. No hit. In 2022, 10 years after the disappearance, the family asked for a formal review. Detectives made limited follow-ups and found no change. The same 3 names still floated in rumor. The case still sat on a foundation of air. Campus policy did change, even if the case did not. The school pushed a walk-home buddy rule and extended the night shuttle routes. Fraternities had to assign sober monitors and keep intoxicated students from leaving alone. Emergency SOS towers added new locations. A mobile app launched with one-tap alerts that broadcast a student's location and called for help. Safety briefings used Michael's timeline as a lesson. A short walk can hide a long risk when the lights fail, the cameras fail, and the hour is thin. The emotional peak of this chapter arrives with 2 images side by side. The first is the clean frame at 1:30 a.m., steady, well lit, and undeniable. The second is everything after. 10 years of dark blocks, broken cameras, and voices talking in circles. 3 people carried suspicion that never became charges. A family carried a question that never softened. The deeper message is blunt. The crew pointed to the fresh wall of dirt. A fragment showed through the soil. Nearby they uncovered a backpack, half-eaten by time. Inside were notebooks and papers fused together by moisture. A name was still legible on a damaged ID sleeve. The scene was quiet. No crowd, no cameras. Just the slow work that should have happened 11 years earlier if the ground had given up its secrets sooner. The discovery would confirm what happened to Michael and reset everything the public thought it knew. It would clear people who had lived under shadows and open a new path toward a suspect no one had named. In that moment, the case finally had a place, not just a time. The next chapter starts there, with a shovel's strike, a forgotten lot, and a truth that had waited underground for more than 10 years. If you've followed the case this far, you know how silence can stretch for years, leaving only questions and shadows. But in 2023, one unexpected discovery pulled Michael Torres' story back into the light. In the next part, we'll uncover what construction workers found beneath the soil and how it finally revealed the truth. Don't miss Part 7. Make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with us as we bring this case to its breaking point. In March 2023, heavy machinery cut into the ground of a vacant lot near the University of Florida. What had been just another construction site turned into the center of a mystery that had haunted Gainesville for more than a decade. Workers saw something unusual mixed in with the soil. At first, they thought it might be debris, maybe an old tree root or broken metal. But when the bucket of the excavator lifted higher, they saw bones, human bones. And next to them, a decayed backpack. The site was shut down immediately. Police taped off the area, forensic teams rushed in, and news crews arrived before the sun had even set. 11 years after Michael Torres vanished, the silence around his case was about to be broken. Forensic specialists carefully collected the remains. A skull, fragments of ribs, bones scattered but still intact enough to tell a story. The backpack was badly damaged by years underground, but it held items that were impossible to ignore. The autopsy revealed something even more chilling. Michael had been stabbed multiple times. Deep wounds cut into his ribs and back, clear signs of a violent attack. The medical examiner ruled that he died quickly after the assault. This was not an accident. It was not an overdose. It was not a fall. Michael had been murdered. Inside the backpack, investigators found class materials and pens. But two key items were missing: his phone and his wallet. Both had been noted in the original missing persons report in 2012. Their absence strengthened a theory that detectives had ignored at the time, that Michael was not the victim of a friend, a classmate, or a bartender. He was the victim of a robbery. The lot where his body was found was less than 300 meters from the path he should have taken back to his dorm. In 2012, that area was nothing but weeds and broken pavement. The streetlights stopped at the corner. The shadows there were thick, and it was the exact spot where canine units had lost Michael's scent on the morning he vanished. The realization was devastating for detectives who had worked the case back then. They had stood only a few steps away from the place where Michael's body lay hidden, but the search was pushed in the wrong direction. The focus on friends and acquaintances had blinded the investigation to the simplest answer. Michael had been attacked on his walk home, in one of the darkest stretches of campus. As the news spread, the names of the three people who had lived under suspicion for years resurfaced. Ryan Mitchell, the fraternity president; Ethan Walker, the scholarship rival; and Jackie Nguyen, the bartender. For years, their faces had been whispered about in dorms, posted in online forums, dragged through tabloids. Now the evidence of a violent robbery gave them something they never had before: a path to being cleared. Headlines across Florida changed tone. The same outlets that once speculated about jealous classmates and fraternity cover-ups now wrote about a robbery gone wrong. Commentators admitted what the families of the accused had insisted all along: the police had been wrong to focus only on the inner circle. For Gainesville police, the discovery meant one thing: the cold case was back open. A new team of detectives. The renewed attention spread beyond the city. National outlets picked up the story of the long-missing student whose remains were finally found by accident. Podcasts and crime shows revisited the case. Social media lit up with debates about how law enforcement could have missed the truth for so long. For Michael's family, the moment was heavy with mixed emotions. At a press conference, his parents stood in front of cameras holding a framed photo of their son. Their voices shook, but their words were steady. They said they were grateful to finally know the truth, but the pain of waiting 11 years was something no one should endure. On campus, students who had graduated years earlier came back for a candlelight vigil. Dozens of candles lined the steps of the student center. Flowers were placed beside Michael's photo. For many, it was the first time they could mourn openly without the cloud of suspicion that had poisoned the case for so long. The discovery flipped the entire narrative. For over a decade, the assumption was that Michael's killer had to be someone close to him. But the bones and the wounds told a different story. This was a crime committed by someone who saw a chance and struck. The missing phone and wallet were not minor details. They were the heart of the crime scene. The pressure on investigators was now enormous. They had the remains, they had the crime scene, but they still didn't have the killer. After 11 years, evidence was scarce. Witnesses had moved away. Memories had faded. Leads had gone cold. Still, the case had something it never had before: a clear direction. For the first time, detectives were looking in the right place. And then, in a twist that no one could have predicted, the next break in the case came not from the discovery of the body, but from an arrest months later in a completely unrelated crime. A career criminal picked up for burglary carried with him a secret he had hidden since the night Michael disappeared. The body in the ground gave the case its heartbeat again. The arrest that followed would give it a face. Stay with us for Part 8, when the investigation finally uncovers the man who ended Michael's life, and how one mistake after another allowed him to walk free for more than a decade. Summer 2023 brought the break no one expected. Police in Florida arrested a repeat burglar during a routine property crime sweep. His name was Anthony "Tony" Ramirez. He had a history of theft and carrying knives. During the search of his small apartment, officers found drawers stuffed with random goods, phones, watches, wallets. Under a loose floorboard, they uncovered a handmade hide box. Inside was a worn leather wallet. It looked old. It looked forgotten. When they opened it, they found a University of Florida student ID and water-damaged papers in the name of Michael Torres, missing since 2012. The room went quiet. Detectives called the Gainesville cold case unit. The red light on a dormant file turned green. Evidence technicians photographed the wallet in place. They bagged it, sealed it, and logged the chain of custody. At the lab, they swabbed the leather for trace skin cells and sweat. Time had not been kind to the material, but there was still a chance to recover touch DNA. They compared the student ID photo and signature to the original 2012 records. The match was exact. Detectives then worked outward. Pawn shops within a 20-mile radius were checked for any attempt to sell Michael's phone or watch back in 2012. Nothing came up. That silence mattered. It suggested the taker kept the items or destroyed them. And one of those items, the wallet, was now in Ramirez's home. Interrogation started the next morning. Ramirez tried a simple story. He said he found the wallet years ago, tossed aside near a vacant lot by the campus. He said he kept it because the leather was nice and because he thought he might use it. He could not explain why he hid it under the floorboard or why he never turned it in. Detectives pressed the map across the table. The lot he described was the same lot where Michael's remains had been found in March 2023. They showed him the report from the canine track that died at the nearby parking lot back in 2012. They asked why Michael's phone had never been recovered. The simple story began to crack. When officers confronted Ramirez with a knife recovered during his recent arrest, they did not. Detectives recorded every word. They asked him to walk them through the minutes. He did. It lined up with the old timeline. At 1:30 a.m., Michael left the fraternity alone. Around 1:35 to 1:40, he entered the dark block near the public lot. Ramirez was waiting along that corridor, hunting for an easy target. The fight was fast. Michael's phone powered down soon after, matching the brief, final ping to the nearest tower. Ramirez dragged Michael into the vacant lot. That was where K9 lost the scent in 2012. He left with the wallet and the phone. He never used the cards. He never used the ID. He hid the wallet because he knew what it meant if anyone found it. A confession is powerful, but detectives worked to lock it in with corroboration. The lab found degraded but usable touch DNA on the wallet, consistent with long-term handling by someone other than Michael. It was not clean enough to prove contact from the night of the murder, but it supported possession. Investigators documented Ramirez's prior arrests from 2011 to 2013 in the Gainesville area. Several involved late-night prowling and threats with a knife. Witnesses from those old cases described him as someone who lingered around campus bars and bus stops. Cell site data from 2012 was incomplete, but the available records placed his phone in a wide sector that covered the route and the lot. These were not smoking guns. They were lines that pointed in the same direction as the confession. Prosecutors filed charges. First-degree murder under the felony murder rule, based on a killing during a robbery. Armed robbery. Abuse of a corpse for the concealment. At the preliminary hearing, the judge reviewed the wallet, the recorded interview, the 2023 forensic report on Michael's remains, and the 2012 canine timeline. The defense argued that the confession was pressured, that the wallet proved only possession, not the act. The court admitted the interrogation recording and the chain of custody documents, finding no coercion and no break in evidence handling. The case moved toward a critical fork: plea or trial. Prosecutor Ramirez accepted the plea. He stood in court, answered the judge's questions, and admitted under oath that he robbed Michael Torres and killed him during the crime. The sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom exhaled. Some people cried, some closed their eyes and held hands. The law had reached the man who should have been in the frame 11 years earlier. Michael's parents gave a short statement outside the courthouse. They did not raise their voices. They thanked the detectives who stayed with the case, the crew who made the discovery at the construction site, and the community members who had kept the story alive. They said their son was gone, but the truth was now on the record. They announced a scholarship in Michael's name for students in economics, the field he loved. It was not closure in the way people use the word casually. It was an answer. It was the end of the search. The Gainesville Police Department issued its own statement. It was direct. The early focus on people close to Michael, the statement said, had consumed resources and narrowed thinking. The department would update its training to better recognize and prioritize opportunistic crimes by strangers when specific conditions appear. Poor lighting, camera gaps, late hours, and victims walking alone. The campus police joined with city officers to draft a new response protocol for the first 72 hours of a disappearance. Expand the search radius at the K9 loss point. Scan for vehicles in and out. Pull private camera footage faster. Connect tip lines to pawn records and cell site data in real time. Then came the repairs to reputations. Ryan Mitchell received letters from the university and the fraternity acknowledging that speculation had harmed him. A local paper ran a feature correcting its earlier slant and gave Ryan a voice in the story. He spoke briefly, grateful that the truth was finally clear, and said he wished it had come earlier. Ethan Walker, the academic rival, saw old posts without context removed from department pages. He moved forward in his career, but the years of whispers left a mark that only time could soften. Jackie Nguyen, the bartender, got a written policy. Changes on campus moved from temporary to permanent. A sober monitor requirement at fraternity events became standard. Hosts had a duty to keep intoxicated students from leaving alone. The night shuttle expanded routes and hours. SOS towers were added, and the campus safety app integrated quick location sharing with emergency services. Training sessions for students highlighted the link between dark corridors, broken cameras, and the thin overnight window where crimes like this happen fast. The story's emotional peak is simple to describe and hard to live through. A wallet hidden under a floorboard for more than 10 years finally reached a courtroom, and a judge read a sentence that will last the rest of a man's life. The family did not get back what they lost, but the facts are now fixed. The file is no longer a question, it is a record. There is a broader lesson in the timeline. When the last clear image is 1:30 a.m. at a doorway, and the next half hour holds no camera, no witness, no data, the range of possibilities widens. If investigators lock too quickly onto familiar faces, the moving stranger can step through the gap and disappear. The case of Michael Torres reminds police, journalists, and communities that the first hours shape the next decade. With the sentence entered, the work of repair begins. 3 people once suspected by rumor, not evidence, have their names back. A university revises its safety rules. A department rewrites parts of its playbook. And a scholarship in Michael's name starts to fund the ambitions of students who walk the same halls he did. The legal chapter is closed, but the legacy chapter opens now. How do we keep campus routes lit and recorded? How do we balance public curiosity with the rights of the uncharged? How do officers guard against tunnel vision when evidence points to a stranger with a short window and a quick escape? These are the questions that Part 9 will take on. It will trace the lasting impact of the case, on policy, on media responsibility, on the people who were hurt by suspicion, and on the parents who turned grief into a promise that another student's path might be safer, because Michael's story was final. The Michael Torres case stretched across more than a decade. 3 moments define its end. The discovery of his remains in March 2023, the wallet and confession later that year, and finally, the life sentence without parole. The truth came late, but the file finally closed on the right man. The verdict was clear. Anthony Tony Ramirez was sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder during the course of a robbery, plus armed robbery. The chain of evidence was strong. His confession, Michael's wallet and ID found in his hiding place, the forensic review of the remains, and the original canine trail that led to the same patch of ground. Justice did not erase the loss, but it brought the story to its rightful end. For the Torres family, it meant the long search was over. They said simply, "We no longer have to look." Their grief remained, but the truth gave them something firm to stand on. They moved quickly to create the Michael Torres Scholarship for Economics students, turning the pain into a promise for others. For those once accused, the case finally cleared their names. Ryan Mitchell, Ethan Walker, and Jackie Nguyen had lived under suspicion for years. Careers stalled, friendships collapsed, reputations never fully recovered. The trial's conclusion did more than convict a killer. It restored identity to 3 people who had been wrongly branded. The university also made changes. After the case, the University of Florida overhauled its safety rules. Cameras were installed across the campus, filling blind spots along dorm routes and fraternity houses. Fraternities were required to assign sober monitors and to make sure no intoxicated student left a party alone. A walk-home buddy program grew into an official shuttle service. Emergency SOS towers were placed around campus, and a one-touch safety app was launched for students. What was once a gap in security in 2012 became standard practice 10 years later. Police admitted their mistakes. For years, they focused on the inner circle, assuming Michael's killer had to be someone he knew. That mistake cost them time. They later outlined new rules for the first 72. The broader impact went beyond law enforcement. The case entered criminology courses, true crime podcasts, and television documentaries. The message was simple but powerful. Not every killer is part of the victim's circle. Sometimes the danger is random, quick, and opportunistic. Other families, waiting on their own missing person cases, found hope that answers could still come, even after 10 years. On campus, the emotional weight was heavy. After the verdict, former students returned for a memorial. They placed flowers and candles near Michael's photo. Many admitted they had once believed the wrong people were guilty. That guilt became a lesson. The culture of suspicion shifted toward a culture of protection. Students spoke less about who to blame and more about how to keep each other safe. The media faced its own reckoning. Several outlets published editorials admitting they had been wrong. Some changed their internal guidelines. Do not publish names of individuals who are not formally charged. Avoid sensational headlines that imply guilt, and use person of interest only with caution. Reporters were told to stick to confirmed evidence, not speculation about motives. The Torres case was cited in journalism conferences as an example of how coverage can harm the innocent when rumor replaces fact. Michael's legacy endures. He is remembered not only as a victim, but as a driver of change. His story reshaped campus safety policies, influenced police training, and pushed the media to reconsider its ethics. It showed how suspicion, when misplaced, can destroy lives. But it also showed that from tragedy, communities can learn and reform. The verdict came 11 years late, but it mattered. It showed that truth can surface even after years of silence. It gave closure to a family, restored names to the innocent, and taught lessons to institutions that failed the first time. Today, the campus paths are brighter, the systems are sharper, and the story of Michael Torres continues to serve its purpose, a reminder to move in the right direction from the very first minute. The case is closed, but its lessons are open. If this story mattered to you, share it, subscribe, and pass along the safety checklist to someone on campus tonight.